Good morning, everyone. Good morning and Happy New Year. Welcome to the West Coast Chamber's annual economic forecast. This is a fan favorite, and I'm so happy to see so many of you with us today. I want to give a special welcome to our virtual attendees. Thank you to the City of Holland for being our technology partner. Our theme this year is Have It Your Way. So however you are choosing to interact with Chamber events, we're going to provide that opportunity for you. You can see that we significantly limited our in-person attendance today. We've got you spread out as much as possible at the tables. I'm going to ask you to put your masks back on as soon as you're finished eating. We care so much about your safety, and that's very, very important to us. So that is our protocol at the Chamber this year, is mask back up. So this is a great event, and we're so happy. We're going to have our economic forecast, and I want you to start thinking of any questions you have, because we will have time at the end of presentation for a little conversation with our presenter if you do have questions today. Everybody received the PowerPoint for the presentation in their email earlier today, so if you have any trouble seeing on the slides, they are in your email. You can go back later today, reference those slides, and then the video recording from the City of Holland is also going to be available that you'll be able to go back and look at. So I want to let you know today's sponsor is Huntington Bank. You know we can't do our chamber programming without Huntington Bank, so I'd like to ask Krista Flynn, the president of the bank, up front for some welcoming remarks. Welcome, Krista.
Thank you so much, Jane. Welcome to 2022, right? Here we are. With the uncertainty of the last couple of years, it's really been so difficult for many of us to make sound corporate strategy decisions, hiring decisions, whether to invest or hunker down. One thing's for sure, we've all had to adjust, right? And be more nimble and continue our businesses as successfully as we can with the information we have. We have to make the best decisions we can, and that's why these types of events are so important. They help us inform our decisions, not only from Dr. Eisley's remarks, which are fabulous, but really from interacting with each other here and making connections and having discussions in the room. I'll bet everybody in this room can think of at least one person that was inspirational or exceptional despite the challenges of 2020 or 2021. And as business leaders in our community, I'd like to challenge us all to be exceptional to at least one other person in 2022. You've taken that first step by being here today and interacting. As we welcome the new year and look forward to what 2022 has in store for us, let's look around the room and see how we can individually make a difference and an impact on someone else. Together, as a business community, there's nothing that 2022 can throw our way that we can't overcome. Knock on wood. I'm thrilled that Huntington Bank is able to sponsor today's event, as I always enjoy Dr. Eisley's presentations, and I really want to thank the Chamber for providing such great programming for our business community. So, thank you all.
Thank you, Krista, and certainly thank you to Huntington Bank. For our regular attendees, you know at this point we might often do tabletop networking, but because we have such a significant number of attendees watching virtually, we're going to ask you to do your tabletop networking at the end today. So before you leave, make sure you've introduced yourself to everyone at your table. Stay as long as you like after the program to continue making connections. This will also allow us to have as much time as possible with Dr. Eisley. So I would like to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Paul Isely. Paul is the Associate Dean for undergrad programs at the Seidman College of Business at Grand Valley State. He joined Grand Valley in 1995 after earning his PhD in economics from Purdue University. And Dr. Isely is very well known in West Michigan as the expert on our West Michigan economy. And I'm so pleased to welcome him today to our audience. And Dr. Isely, the stage is yours.
Okay, you can hear me? Good. Okay, so I may be an expert at economics, but as you can tell, I'm not an expert at skiing, and so that's where we're at today. All right, so I have the tricky position today of trying to give you some guidance for 2022. And 2022 is going to be a little bit more complicated to think through than 2021. So where I'm going to start, however, is to remind you what I told you last year and compare to what actually happened during the course of the year. So I'm going to say right up front, I got really, really lucky last year. So for what that's worth. So last year we had this graph at the very end of your presentation, and we gave you an estimate that I expected that inflation would be somewhere around 5% for the year. All right. Right now we're looking, and that I normally measure inflation using the PCE measure, which the Federal Reserve uses, as opposed to the CPI measure that you hear on the news. So the PCE inflation for this last year is coming in at 5 to 6%. The CPI will come in around 6 to 7%. Remember, when I was telling you this, the consensus economic forecast in the United States was that inflation would be 2.5 to 3% for the year. So we did pretty well last year on that measure, and the things that we thought would be happening that would be causing that inflation actually happened. All right. Then we also told you that across the Kent, Ottawa, Muskegon, Allegan area, that we would see approximately a 3.1% growth in employment. Right now, we're sitting on exactly 3.1% increase in employment, measured by the establishment survey, when we ask employers how many people are employed. We have a problem with the data this year, looking specifically at Ottawa County. Okay, the Ottawa County numbers, so just looking specifically at Ottawa County like I like to do, is done using the survey where they ask people if they're unemployed or not. They did a data correction in September, all right? And they say that that data correction is consistent with last year, but not consistent with earlier in the year. I don't believe them. The reason I don't believe them is right now, if you take those numbers at face value, there are fewer people working in Ottawa County today than there was in June of 2020. It doesn't pass the smell test. So my bet is, as they deal with these corrections over the next few months, that number will start to come back into line. So I'm sort of stuck using the CES number, which is the number where we ask employers, and that covers several counties as opposed to just one county. So I'm telling you that. I also thought that we might be back to 2019 levels here in Ottawa County. We didn't quite reach that, so I was wrong on that, but across the rest of my numbers, it was pretty good. All right, so we're hoping we do as well for you this year as we did last year. All right, so what have we seen in 2021? We've seen the economy accelerating out of the deep hole it fell into. All right, it was in a pretty bad way as we were going through 2020. We were starting to crawl out of it, and some industries were accelerating out of it as we went through 2020. But as we got into 2021, we then started to see those service industries and those retail industries and those restaurant industries start to settle out and, in many cases, start to excel. All right? But I want to remind you, and I said this last year, so we're going to say it again this year, it's still a virus and a public health emergency, not a broken economy. Okay? We have not reached a point yet where the economy is behaving in a way that says the financial system's broken down or the economic system is broken down. All right? So what do we know when we get to the end of this? That the public health emergency is done. I tend to use one number at this point to help me see that because there's a million numbers out there to look at. So when do we know the public health emergency is done? When this graph doesn't have little red stars. Right? So what is this graph? This graph This graph is a graph of excess deaths in the United States. Okay? So the orange line is the number of deaths we expect in any given week. And we can model that, and we do a very good job of modeling that normally. The red line is what if we were wrong, and and that puts us at the 95th percent confidence interval. Okay? Anything above that is considered an excess death. So if you look all the way over there on the left, you're going to see that little bump. That little bump is a really bad flu year. All right? On the right, where you see that set of stars just stretch out, that is during the COVID time. All right? So you'll hear arguments about whether or not someone died of COVID, or did they die of a heart attack, or did they die of something else. What we know is a lot more people are dying than we would expect. And once we see those little red stars disappear, then we know we've passed the public health emergency. And that's when we know that we can stop worrying about those supply chain issues that you're worrying about. We can stop worrying about having to shut down because we run out of workers because they are testing for COVID. All right? You have to ignore the last 3 bars here. You have to ignore the last 3 bars because it takes a while for hospitals to give data to the CDC. Okay? Now, if you don't trust the CDC, the same graph is made by 3 other independent groups, and they all look the same. All right? So what we're hopeful for is what you can see as we went into the beginning of this year, that number of excess deaths was falling. It's continued to fall. And hopefully as we get into February or March, you'll see those red stars disappear. Okay? So that's the key to reaching the end of this. Until that time, I continue to have to model the virus more than I have to model the economy. And that's pretty tricky because I'm trained as an economist. But nonetheless, we move on. So, what characterizes where we are today? It's the same thing that characterized where we were last year. Massive government stimulus. This stimulus has placed us in a way that is inconsistent with any other recession we have ever experienced. In fact, this recession only lasted 2 months long. We've never had a recession last 2 months. It was April and May of 2020. After that point, we were out of the recession. All right? If you own a restaurant, you might not feel that way. But so I'm going to remind you, you can see the top line is disposable income. That's income after taxes, and it goes all the way through this year. You can see the first stimulus bump, the second stimulus bump, the third stimulus bump, and you can see that during the course of the entire year, income stayed above what people would normally expect. All right? You can also see people consumed less than we would normally expect. So what happened to all of that? It was saved. So the next question I get is, yeah, Bill Gates saved a lot of money this year. And Elon Musk, he's worth a lot more than he was last year. What about people who aren't as well off? All right. This is the change in the net worth of the bottom 50%. All right? These are the bottom 50%. Notice that between the start of the pandemic and now, they had a 75% increase in wealth. Let me say that again. A 75% increase in wealth. It's why we're not seeing foreclosures. It's why we're not seeing lots of bad loans. It's why we're not seeing lots of panic. In fact, if you think about if you think a little bit about when we started hearing about things like income disparity, that happened around 2010. What happened then? We had gone through the 90s and the early 2000s where 4% of the wealth in the United States was held by the bottom 50%. By the time we reached 2010, it was 0.2%. All right? That creates instability. That creates social upheaval. And we've seen that as a result of these things. What's happened since that time? We've gone from 0.2 back to 2.5. So we're not quite back to where we were in the 90s, but we're moving very quickly in that way. So what's the bad news about this? For the very bottom group, right, the very bottom group of people, they likely will burn through this savings over the course of the next 6 months. So we really have about another 6 months before we start to see people become more desperate for jobs, before they start really looking at how much do I have to work, before we start to see some of those normal economic things that we expect during a downturn, where people start having some financial problems. So we got about another 6 months before we have to worry about that. This is not to say everybody is okay. This is to say as a group they were okay. So I really want to talk about that, because there was a large group of people who couldn't work that entire time. I have a lot of friends in theater. They were decimated. Many of them were placed on federal assistance just because they couldn't work for 18 months, all right? There are many people who are worse off. But as a group, they are substantially better off. And we see that because we see more money in their checking accounts, we see more wealth, we see less credit card balances. And as a result, this is not 2008. Don't expect the big foreclosure crisis to happen. It's not going to happen in Michigan. It's not going to happen in the United States. In fact, here in Michigan, you can see the percentage mortgages that are 90 days late is near a record low. And you can see that we're outperforming the United States. This is a big deal. This is why we're in a different position today. And it's why we're asking questions like, are we part of the donut? Uh-oh. A donut. It's not breakfast food. What happened is that during the pandemic, people wanted to get out of big cities. And what we found is that they moved out of those big cities into areas very close to those big cities. They didn't want to move too far away because they figured that they're going to have to come back to work 2 or 3 times a week because they figured that the world's going to become hybrid. But they wanted to move out of downtown. And we saw really heavy evidence of that in the largest cities in the United States. But we also saw it in cities like Grand Rapids. All right? So in Grand Rapids, you can see that early in the pandemic, the outskirts of the orange line there, right? Yep, the orange line. You can see it accelerating a little bit faster than you can the gray and the blue lines. That's people moving out into the suburbs and moving away from downtown, all right? Then you can see that by the time we reached the beginning of 2021, they both started moving in tandem again. So here in Grand Rapids, the donut effect only lasted for about 2 quarters. And interestingly enough, it affected Georgetown Township for about 2 quarters. After that, we really started to see this happen along the lake shore here in Ottawa County, because we started to see people from Chicago say, we need someplace further away from Chicago. And I have lots of money, so I'm going to buy into places that aren't in the cornfields of Ottawa County, but are closer to the lake amenities of Ottawa County. So we started to see that start to happen. We started to see those prices start to pick up faster as we went through 2021. So here in the real estate model here in Ottawa County, you've disconnected from what we're seeing now in Kent County. So what you're hearing in Kent County are these prices going up. You're seeing those sorts of issues start to happen. Here the increases are more steady. The building is more steady. We're seeing an increase in single-family building, but A lot of that is being done in that $300,000 to $375,000 range. And a lot of the people wanting to buy houses are in that $250,000 to $300,000 range. So there's still a little bit of a disconnect going on here in Ottawa County, and we're going to need people transitioning upward in houses to create space in the bottom for those millennials and Generation X's to move into their first house. And we're just starting to see enough single-family building for that to happen. Up until this time, it's mostly been multifamily building across the region that's been keeping up with population growth. So that change is really important to follow, but it also means that you shouldn't really be expecting breakneck increases in real estate prices this year. Last year, it started to cool a little bit when you had a showing and you wanted to, and people were bidding on it. Fewer people were bidding on it. It still happened pretty fast. We think that that timing will continue to slow down a little bit. It's still a seller's market, but it's not going to be quite the seller's market that we saw in 2020 or 2021. Okay? Here you can also see the number of sales went down in Grand Rapids, and then they picked up after the fact. So what happened is it created a vacuum. People moved out, then those prices inside went down, and people went in and purchased downtown. What's interestingly enough is the bidding has been high enough that it's keeping those institutional investors who want to buy 100 houses or 500 houses or 1,000 houses out of the market here in West Michigan. So right now, single-family houses are still mostly being sold to single families. That's good news. This is just to remind you that Ottawa County is moving in tandem with Kent County. Kent County performed worse during the last downturn than Ottawa County, but it's now starting to outperform Ottawa County on prices. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that your demographics here in Ottawa County shift older than they do in Kent County. So in Kent County, about 55% of the people, if you added up all the people between 28 and 38, and all the people over 65, in Kent County, there would be more people in that young group. Here in Ottawa County, there are more people in that old group. And that difference is what's going to start driving those housing prices outside of the high-end vacation market. So that's what we're seeing right now. I'm going to spend some time on inflation because it's the one thing that everybody asks me about. And I'm assuming it's one of the primary things that are on all of your minds. All right, so even though that's not West Michigan specific, I think it's important to spend some time on. So there are a lot of price drivers that we're going to see going into the course of the next year. This is the first one. This is the inventory to sales ratio. So it's how much stuff stores have in them compared to how much stuff they sell. All right? And what you can see is the inventory to sales ratio. I don't include automobiles in here, because if you include automobiles, it just drops off a cliff. There's just no automobiles to buy any place. Well, that's not quite true, and if you sell automobiles, you know there's automobiles to sell. There's just not as many as you'd like. All right? You see that drop. What we need to do is we need to restock and put that back into place. What we've seen here is a big enough drop that it will take months and months and months for that restock to happen once we get the supply chain working. So if you're thinking the supply chain is going to fix in the next 3 months, don't. We're expecting the supply chain to remain quite a mess for the first 6 months. And then for the second 6 months, we'll start to see some slow healing. All right? And that's if we don't have another wave. So if Omni Delta or whatever the next one's going to be comes along, it can still mess things up. Because what's causing this problem is the shutdowns in China. So it's China trying to keep their COVID zero. When one person gets it, they shut down the entire city. If that's a port city, they've shut down their port, and then they need to catch up. They're going to keep this COVID zero going at least through February because they want the Olympics to be okay. So they really have no choice but to double down on this for the next couple months. So we're at least a few months away from that end happening. Here in the United States, you've heard, wait a minute, we can't find enough truckers, and there's trucking problems and all that sort of stuff. People forget very quickly. History is something that people don't remember very well. Does anybody remember in 2019 that we changed the trucking rules? Does anybody remember that? Does anybody remember that we said at the end of 2019 that that was going to result in a 10 to 20% drop in trucking capacity in the United States? Does anybody remember that conversation? And then it became unimportant because COVID happened. This is still that roost. It's still that problem. So what we're seeing right now is there were two things that happened there. One, they changed how you do record keeping so that you couldn't cheat. I think that's the smaller of the two. The bigger problem was how they changed how you counted being outside the truck and whether you could count being outside the truck while you were waiting for somebody to load your truck or you were waiting in line for the truck. And they changed the way those happened. So as a result, now, if somebody tries to go pick up a shipping container in a port, given their wait time and how it's counted now, they can make one trip a day on their hours. They used to be able to make 3 trips a day on their hours. So at some level, the trucking issues that we're seeing today are a regulatory issue more than they are a COVID issue. All right? Now, we do have fewer truckers. We do have some problems like that. But realistically, this is exactly what we said would be happening. It will keep your shipping rates for trucks higher for the foreseeable future. All right? Wages. This is the other thing that's happening. So this is in Ottawa County. This is the average hourly wage. And you can see that for 2021, it was up more than 7%. All right? A lot of this is on the bottom end of the market. So what we're seeing are those people near minimum wage or those lower end starter jobs all of a sudden had between a $2 and a $5 increase per hour. And it shoved them up. Okay? That's what started all of this. Now what's starting to happen is the supervisor's not being paid enough, so we're going to have to adjust them. And the management's not being paid enough compared to them, so we're going to have to adjust them. That's what's going to be happening all year this year. That doesn't happen instantaneously. Economists call it sticky. Wages are sticky. They can be sticky because of union contracts, and in places where there are union contracts, you can see that happening. But it's also sticky because most white-collar workers only have their wages changed once a year. And that wage change tends to happen at the beginning of the fiscal year for the corporation, which is January 1st or July 1st or October 1st for most corporations. All right? So we're going to see that start to ratchet up as we go through this year. And we're going to start to see those wage increases bleed up. And the demographics are such that you're not going to see those prices on the bottom end go down. So there's a lot of firms that have been trying to do temporary increases like signing bonuses, and we'll give you your first year, you get here for the first year, we'll give you this, but not change the base wage. This isn't going away because that high school class here in Ottawa County is dropping and will continue to drop for the next 10 years. Okay? Then it starts to go up. But most of us aren't making business decisions 10 years out. All right? Really bad news in my business. All right? But what's bad news in my business becomes bad news in your business. All right? And then what you pay for housing is changing. So you all know housing prices here in Ottawa County have gone up between 5 and 10% over the course of last year. But so have rental rates. So this shows for the MSA, so it includes Grand Rapids. But you can see that we haven't seen those rental rates slow down. They continue to increase. So what does this all mean? So when we add it all up to figure out what's going to happen to inflation, we have to know what percentage people spend on stuff. Okay? So, I I gotta go over. Food. So food, we know food inflation is gonna happen this year. Why do we know food inflation is gonna happen this year? Because lots of the things that happened last year are going into food price increases this year. And they're telling us they're going to increase their prices, all right? But we have other things happening too. Did you know that the vast majority of fertilizer is made from natural gas? Do you know what happened to the price of natural gas last year? Yeah. So we're seeing fertilizer prices up 40 or 50%. And we're seeing farmers change the types of crops they're making in order to get away from that. All right? That's affecting food prices. We'll see those food prices go up this year, probably between 3 and 5%. All right. Fuel prices. There's not going to be fuel price inflation this year in any appreciable way. But it's not going to go down either. All right? The prices went up last year. Oil's gone to a new trading range of $70 to $100 a barrel. Why? Because we moved from Texas being the price setter to Saudi Arabia being the price setter. Given the regulations that we have on methane, given the fact that banks are reticent to fund new oil exploration in Texas because of those regulations, Texas is not responding with new rig counts, which shows us that they aren't saying, hey, the price has gone up, we better start drilling. There's not that reaction happening. It's not happening because of those things that are in place. So we don't expect a lot of prices there. Goods. Goods are going to continue to go up this year because the supply chain pieces are still in place. The commodity prices are still in place. We already know that bicycles for this summer are 20% above bicycles for last summer. All right? Not everything is going to go up in price, but many things will. All right? Shelter. We already showed you rental rates are going up. We already showed you, sorry, I'm a professor. If I don't look at a clock, and there's no clock in the room, I'll be talking at 10 o'clock tonight and not realize that I'm still talking. So I have to take a quick look to make sure we're doing okay. Okay? So what we're seeing is very strong growth there. And people are like, why is that not creating more inflation? Well, the reason is, if you're in a rental property, your rates aren't going up to the new rate. Because they don't want you to leave because you have a paying customer. And they don't want to throw you out and do a grab bag and maybe not have one. So if you're in a place and you're not changing places, your rent isn't changing. And if you're in a house and not buying a new house, you're not paying for the fact that your house is more expensive. All right? The estimate right now on the house that I bought 2 years ago is that it's worth 20% more than when I bought it. That'd be nice. Not sure it's true, but it'd be nice. But I don't have to pay for that 20% because I'm already in the house. I already bought it. All right? And only about 10 to 20% of the people move around during the course of a year. And that's why 5 to 10% inflation in housing bleeds down to 1 to 2% in inflation bump. Okay? Services are where we're going to see the big increases this year. So that yellow thing. Things where you have people do things for you is where you're going to see the price go up. And if you've gone out to a restaurant recently, you've already started to feel that. I did carry out last night from a restaurant I normally do, and it was 20% more than it was a year ago. You're going to see those prices go up. Why? Because those wage increases are baked in. You're going to see those wage increases continue to happen this year, and those wage increases are going to drive those services. When you add it all together, we expect wages this year to go up about 6% here in West Michigan. And I get that by asking business owners in Ottawa County. So I pulled this specifically for Ottawa County business owners who have answered our surveys. And we saw about a 6% increase. And we expect about a 3% employment increase across Ottawa County. So we expect the increase this year to be about the same as last year. All right? The difference this year is that increase in wages might not be happening at the bottom end, but might be happening at the middle side of people's wages. Okay? Prices. If you add all those things up around the pie that I said and the numbers I gave you, you come up with around a 3.5% to 4.5% increase in prices this year. So prices going up, but a little slower than next year. Realize the consensus for next year for economists is 2.7%. So I'm again calling for higher price increases than the average economist in the United States. So what makes me feel good about that is the average of all economists in the United States have been wrong for the last 18 months on prices. So I think there's going to be stronger prices than you expect there. There's more upside risk because when we ask business owners across Ottawa County, they're expecting 7% inflation. So they're expecting next year's inflation to be consistent with this year's inflation. So when I'm asking business owners, they're telling me here in West Michigan that they expect price increases this year to be similar to what happened last year. All right? So we'll see which way things happen there, but understand that's where we're going. Okay, and understand that we're reaching a point where the Federal Reserve is going to increase interest rates. So remember, an increase in interest rates will slow down the price increases. And we expect 75 to 100 basis points, 3/4 of a point to a point in short-term interest rates. We were already calling 2 months ago that we expected that March, April, or May would be the first increase. We believe that because of politics. It wouldn't be until February that Jerome Powell, or whoever it would be ratified as the Fed chief, okay? And the new Fed team would be in place from the new Biden choices. And they needed to get it done before summer because during summer, they don't want to be accused of affecting the midterm elections. So we're going to expect to see a bump in the spring and then another bump in the late fall. And we expect that there won't be anything in late summer because they don't want it to look like they're influencing the elections. That also means they likely will have to do a bigger bump in spring in order to make up for the fact that they can't do any in between. All right? So, where are my warnings? So for Ottawa County, we showed you this graph last year, but I brought it back because I just love it. Ottawa County, particularly the lakeshore side of Ottawa County, is highly dependent on manufacturing. And much of that manufacturing is second and third tier automotive manufacturing. All right? Why is that important? What's happening right now is there's a lot of uncertainty going into these markets. They're having to spend a lot of money on capital to try and keep up. They're having to spend money on automation to try and overcome the fact that they can't find the entry workers that they want. They're having to spend that money, but they're not quite sure what's going to happen on the other side. On top of that, we have fixed price contracts. So what's happening is over the last year is they have a fixed price contract, but they have an increasing set of costs that they're facing at the second and third tier level. That's resulting in them having a weaker and weaker balance sheet. We're looking at automotive this year, basically putting out as many units as last year. Last year they did a lot at the beginning of the year, not so much at the end of the year. This year it will be the reverse, not so much at the beginning of the year, more at the end of the year. And because of this hiatus that's happened in here, we are doing a faster switch to EVs. We also have a lot of powertrain second and third tier here in Ottawa County. All right? So what this is doing is it's bleeding off that capital that they would have, and it's going to make it harder for them to adjust to these changes that are happening. And it's going to open more of these firms up to mergers and acquisitions. So we're going to probably over the course of this year start to see more firms start to sell out or merge together or start to talk about those things as we go across Ottawa County. And as that happens, it's going to move control of those corporations out of Ottawa County to other places. And that will start to affect some of the autonomy that you've had here that's made you a little recession-proof here in Ottawa County. So that's one of my warnings. Hopefully I'm wrong, but that's one of my warnings at this point. So what should you watch? Don't watch unemployment. First of all, at the Ottawa County level, the data is garbage right now. We discussed that. But it's also a bad number to watch anyways. All right? Do watch excess deaths. When they go away, the supply chain issues will start to go away, shutdowns will start to go away, and our healthcare workers will be able to sleep better. All right? Do watch freight rates, all right, because that's really what's driving the goods side, and we expect that you'll start to see those moderate as we get into the second half of this year. And do watch what people spend, consumption expenditures. Normally, I don't look at that. Consumers are really, really bad about telling where things are going to go. Really, really bad. But right now, they're in charge because they have so much money. Trillions of dollars of excess money. And if they decide to spend it, things will really heat up and prices will really start to accelerate. But more likely, they're saving a little bit more than they did before because we have more people closer to retirement. This let them catch up a little bit. This let them get under some debt, out from under some debt that they had. So they're not quite willing yet to jump back under that debt. So this will probably, instead of accelerate consumption, probably maintain consumption. All right? And therefore, we're in a better situation as consumers for the next year. But if I'm wrong and everybody decides to party like it's 1999 this summer, expect those prices to go up more than what I've said. All right? So, there's still a lot of pent-up demand for 2022, but there's going to continue to be supply-side disruptions, and that's going to continue to keep those price increases elevated. So be prepared for that as we go through 2022. And then when we finally reach summer of 2023, you're going to start feeling like we're almost back to normal. But you won't realize it because we've been in 3 years of not normal. So thank you, and I'm prepared for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eisley. A lot of great things to think about, and I know we're all going to be looking for summer of 2023 here. We've got time for questions. Who's got the first question? Yeah, go ahead. Would you stand, please, Mark?
So how long can the stock market tolerate these ultra-high PE ratios?
So the question was, how long is the stock market going to stay overvalued? Well, one of the things I've learned is that the stock market doesn't follow fundamentals. Fundamentals drive the stock market over 10 years, but not over a year. So we know fundamentally that the stock market has many indicators that say that it's overvalued by 10 to 20%. What we don't know as economists is when will people decide to realize that within their holdings. This would be a good year for that. We've seen some shakiness among investors as they start to realize that interest rates are finally going up again. It's like, no duh, they're going to go up again. But I think they're also coming to terms with how prices are going to be changing. And they're not sure how the new crop of leadership is going to handle those price changes. You have to be as old as I am to remember inflation like what we're having right now. And I barely remember it. I was in high school, all right? So most of your stock traders are younger. Most of your bond traders are younger. Bond traders don't make it past 45. They burn out and they go to an easier job, all right? So these people have never been in a high price environment. And so they're struggling to figure out how these interest rates and prices are going to play out and how that might play out for corporate strategies. So I think 2023 might be a good year for that correction, but I'm not going to stake a flag in and say it's going to happen. What I can say is over the next 5 years, that 10 to 20% will get bled off. Whether it gets bled off because now the returns are less every year, or whether it gets bled off because we have a correction, it will happen over the next 5 years. I know that's not the answer you wanted.
Next question. Yeah, Jennifer, would you stand, please?
Hi, Jennifer Owens. How do you see Industry 4.0 changing our employment makeup, and how will the robots impact our overall workforce?
How the robots will impact our overall workforce. It's going to change the skill level. It's going to change the skill sets that the workers need to be in the workplace. It's going to redefine what a non-skilled worker is in the United States to being something that really isn't non-skilled. It's really going to have some skills. One of the turning points for me on this was that restaurant in Grand Haven that decided to put in a robot as a busboy. All right? So it's like, how can they do that? There's no way that's cost effective. So they said how much the robot was. So being an economist, the first thing I did is started scribbling on my piece of paper. And I found that in 2019, the ROI on that robot would have been 5 years. No restaurant is going to invest in something with a 5-year ROI. Now, given what you have to pay for a busboy, the ROI is between 1 and 1.5 years. All right? So what's happening is those lower end prices going up as fast as they are making it more economical to do the automation. So more automation will happen. What's the constraint? All of these automation firms are running flat out. They're already generating as much change as can happen. And so it's going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 years for that to happen. Realistically, as we reach the end of this decade, we're going to start to see more young workers again compared to what we've seen over the last few years. After a decade of a drought, shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, Generation Z is much smaller than the millennials, and now we're starting to see the millennial echo start to happen in about 10 years, and that millennial echo will now have more kids in it. So what that's going to do is create a very high-price environment for low-wage workers for the next 5 years. And that's going to lead to increased automation as we go through it. And that means as that next group comes out, labor will start to lose the power that they've gained in the last 2 years as we leave this decade. And so I don't think it's going to change things a lot for the next 5 years, but I think the 5 years after that, it's going to change what we have to teach in high schools, because it's going to change what an entry-level worker has to know in order to be in the workplace.
Yeah. Last question.
You mentioned that those that are at the lower end of the income levels will start to work with their savings from the stimulus packages in the next 6 months or so. These would increase in needs for jobs at that level. Do you find that at that level that base rate will start to lower, or do you think that'll stay high in the future?
All right, so as we start to have more workers come in because they've burned through their savings, how will that affect wages? And the short answer right now is there's a higher demand for wages than we have potential new entrants into the market. So of what we have out there right now, of the missing workers, about half of them are retirees. The other weird thing that I've been hearing is that becoming a retiree has changed in the last 2 years. So that employers are telling me that people are retiring a little earlier than they expected them to, even after we got through that first part of the pandemic. All right? So that loss of those high-skilled people who've been in a job for 30 years and replacing them with somebody with 0 years experience or 2 years experience, it's still going to be, we need to have 2 of them to replace somebody that we just lost. And therefore, I don't expect those people coming in are going to affect that a lot. Hopefully, and we've seen some of this as we talk to places like Baker College and other places that do a lot more technical teaching, is that we do have some students starting to realize that, and they're trying to use the last 6 months and the next 6 months to upskill and to be ready for the job market as they come in. So we're starting to see that little bump that will upskill people a little bit. So no, I don't expect it will draw down wages. It might take a little bit of an edge off of it, and we might not see McDonald's paying $20 an hour in downtown Grand Rapids. But for general small businesses, for manufacturing firms, those prices have gone up, and I don't think they're coming down in the near term.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Eisley. We'll look forward to bringing you back next year as we do another look back to see how your predictions were. We appreciate your insights very, very much. Thank you to our audience members. Please join me in thanking Dr. Eisley. Thank you to our digital attendees for joining us today. We appreciate it. Again, stay healthy, stay safe, mask back up, stay as long as you like to continue your networking, and have a great day.
Turn this off. Whoop.